All right, you guys, it's your favorite time. We get to talk about math when you're in a culinary class. No, but in all seriousness, it does provide some insight into why you go to a restaurant and you're wondering why you're paying $14 for a burger when you could go down the street and get the same burger for $10. For figuring out the cost, the menu cost, how much you charge your customers. How much does the food cost to make? And then you have to take into a lot of other factors into account because you have to pay your restaurant staff. You have to pay the rent on the building. You have to pay your gas bill. So we're going to take into account all of those factors for that final menu price. We're going to break this down, so don't feel overwhelmed. We are starting out with Unit 1 today, and it's probably the easiest when it comes to the math portion, and a lot of the vocabulary you should be familiar with today as well. So this presentation was actually put together by ProStart teachers, and basically ProStart is a national organization that has curriculum developed for different schools, and some culinary arts programs use their entire program. We only use this small section of it. And the presentation was prepared by William Nolan, and then it's also backed by National Restaurant Association. So I hope that in May we'll be able to take a field trip to McCormick Place where the National Restaurant Association show is being held. And you'll be able to sample a bunch of new foods and see some new plating options and talk to marketing specialists and things like that. It's pretty cool. So again, just some sponsors of this presentation. So some vocab terms that we're going to be covering in part 1 is standardized recipe, yield, portion size, and conversion factor. Most of these you've heard before. Conversion factor, I think, is our only real new one that we haven't talked about before. So we'll talk about that. That's what we're figuring out today. And by the end of today, you should be able to identify the conversion factor when computing recipes to feed a certain amount of people. So you know what a standardized recipe looks like already, but basically you know that it can be referred to as a formula. And the major difference between the standardized recipe versus your home recipe is that that standardized recipe usually is written in ounces. You know from taking baking and pastry or just from hearing me talk in class that ounces is always so much more accurate than volume or count. So 10 ounces of red pepper, no matter how much you cut it up, if you mince it versus you slice it, it's still going to be 10 ounces. You're still going to have the same amount. Whereas if you just say one red pepper, you don't know if it's a large red pepper or a small red pepper. So that's why standardized recipes, you know, when people go to a restaurant, they want the same thing every time. If they ordered it last time, it was really good. They want that really good thing, right? So the standardized recipe written in weight versus volume, that's why, because you want the same result every single time, whether you're making one item or you're making 500 items for a catering job. The yield, you know, is the total amount that the recipe produces. The yield could be in ounces, so it could be 100 ounces of soup. It could also be in count. So let's say you made lasagna and it was 25 servings. It could also be in portion size, so it could say that they made, 25 servings of 6 ounces. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit when we get to conversion factor. But yield is the total amount that the recipe makes. Portion size, you know we've talked about this before, that you have the portion scoops sometimes restaurants use. Sometimes their serving dishes are portion sizes. So like if they're serving soup, they may just fill up their soup bowl. They know that it's 10 ounces, so everybody is getting the same soup bowl, right? So they're all getting that same 10 ounces. It could also be in count. So if you order the shrimp and you get 5 pieces of shrimp, that's the portion size. Everybody who orders that shrimp dish is getting 5 pieces. So we talked a little bit about portion size before. It could be weight. I kind of already talked about that with the soup, but like a steak, when you order an 8-ounce steak, obviously once it cooks down, it's not 8 ounces, but that's the portion size. It's the 8 ounces. Each person is getting that 8-ounce steak. And conversion factor is new. This is going to make a little bit more sense when we get to the math portion of this, but this is going to be the number that we multiply ingredients by to arrive at a new yield. So that means that if you have a recipe that makes 100 ounces of soup, and you need it to make 500 ounces, because you need to serve, I don't know, a catering job or the weekend rush, you would need to multiply everything in the recipe by 5, right? Because your original recipe feeds 100, and then that you need it to feed 500. You wouldn't make the soup 5 times because that would be a waste of your resources and your time. You would just make one big batch of the soup as long as you had the equipment that served 500 ounces versus 100 ounces. So we'll get to the conversion factor in a minute if that was a little bit confusing, but it'll make more sense when we get to the cost or when we get to the math part. So here's your example of a yield. The restaurant right now is saying that they are feeding 24 people, so this is the number of portions, 6 ounces. So let's just go back to the soup because it's the easiest thing. I don't know why I keep going to it, but it's the easiest thing to think about right now. So 24 people are getting 6 ounces of soup, which would be a very small portion size of soup, but whatever. So we take 24 and we times it by 6, and you get a total original yield of 144 ounces. So right now, their standardized recipe as written makes 144 ounces. So it could be 10 ounces of red pepper, 10 ounces of green pepper, 60 ounces of chicken broth, 20 ounces of heavy whipping cream. So all of those ounces add up to give you all of those ingredients add up to give you 144 total ounces. Okay, that's your original yield. Easy, right? Just multiplication. You've been doing this since 3rd grade. Now we need to figure out, okay, we have that original recipe that gives us 144 ounces, but now we need to serve more people because we got contracted for a catering job or whatever it is. So now we have our original yield, which is how much the original recipe makes. This is what the standardized recipe is written to make. That was that 144 from the last slide. And then we have the desired yield, how much you want to make, how many people you have to feed, and how many ounces are you feeding them. So that equation is going to be desired yield over original yield. And that's going to give you that conversion factor, the number that you're going to multiply everything in the recipe by. So just real quick, back to my example, we used the desired yield was 500 ounces. And the original yield was 100 ounces. So 500 divided by 100 would be 5. So the conversion factor would be 5. We multiply everything in the recipe by 5. So if you needed 10 ounces of red pepper in the first recipe, you multiply it by 5, and then you need 50 ounces of it to make the 500 desired yield total ounces. So let's plug in the numbers. We have our original yield up here. We already did this equation on our last slide. And then we have the desired yield, how much you want to make, how many people you have to feed. So here you'll notice that both things change. We have an increased number of portions going to 56, and we have an increased portion size going to 8 ounces. So we're going to do 56 times 8 to get 448 ounces. That's going to give us our desired yield. So how much we want to make versus how much the recipe originally made. We take 448, how much we want to make, and we divide it by 144, how much the original recipe made. And you get 3.1. So we're going to multiply everything in that recipe by 3.1. Now, I would technically probably round up here because if you just do it by 3.1, you're going to be a little shy on the total ounces. And I'd always like to have a little bit extra just in case. I don't want my customers to be angry, but it is eating into then your profit if you have extra waste. So it really just depends on how you run your restaurant and manage it. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these examples. We have an original recipe that feeds 24 people, 12-ounce serving. So if we take 24 and we multiply by 12, we get 288 ounces. Okay, I know it's ounces because I'm just using this same unit. Okay, now we need to feed 125 people 8 ounces. So they're getting a little smaller portion, but we're feeding many more people. So we're going to take 125 and we're going to multiply by 8. That's going to be 1,000. Okay, we need 1,000 ounces in order to get our new recipe. So desired yield over original yield. Your conversion factor for this should be 3.47.